Hi, everyone. Having an exciting morning coffee chat on this episode of Words, Images, and Worlds with author Wes Blake. Wes is the author of a novella called Pineville Trace that we'll talk a little bit about today. And Wes, glad to be chatting with you. Thanks for joining this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure, a pleasure. I encountered your work through NetGalley, reviewing books and sort of roaming across different titles, and love the novella format. Love the way you have it kind of in a an episodic sort of way. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as far as form and how the story came to be.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Jason. So, first of all, one thing I should say, the viewers out there, this is kind of like a Where's Waldo moment. The book does feature a cat named Buffalo, and I've got a cat here in the room. So you may see her wonder. I think it would be hypocritical to keep her out of an interview about this book. So, but yeah, thanks for looking into the book. The I'm like you. I love that novella form. I
Hmm.
always have. Back in high school, reading of Mice and Men, there's something so concise and impactful about that novella form. You get into a story, there's enough time to become invested and have an emotional experience, and then you get out. It kind of leaves you wanting more almost. But I do love that form. I feel like it's undervalued.
Hmm.
I feel like, from a publishing standpoint, it's like, you need to have three novellas in one book. And of course, there's that great Jim Harrison book and some Stephen King books that do that, Legends of the Fall and The Body and some of those different seasons, I think is a Stephen King one. But I feel like that almost devalues the form,
Yeah.
because I think it's a form that is deserving of more attention and is a form that is really impactful for readers. But but yeah, that form I had that story in mind. Well, I should start. I had the form in mind. I got to where I was attracted to the idea of doing the novella form, but having like an episodic approach, like flash fiction. So where it could,
Hmm.
and it was kind of an ambitious goal that I had in mind for this form. For a number of years, I had this form in mind. I was influenced by a book called Delta 88 by Christopher Chambers. And if you haven't read that, anyone listening, that is a fantastic book. It's the individual flash stories are arresting, and there's this consistent tone throughout that, and a consistent point of view, and it just kind of adds up to something else through the process. But that really inspired me, and I wanted to do something in that ballpark. But this I had written about this character, Frank Russet, the main character. And for folks listening that haven't read it, it's he's a Southern revival preacher. And so at the point of Pineville Trace, he's been sentenced to minimum security prison for fraud. And so he's kind of had his journey, and it's kind of he's had this fall from grace, and that's where the story begins.
Hmm.
That classic archetype, right? The minimum security prison and the former faith healer, right?
Right,
So,
right.
I thought that I was done writing about Frank Russet. In 2014 was when I first started writing about this character. I was at a literary conference in Portugal called Disquiet. I had just started my MFA and kind of rededicated myself to writing. And so someone gave this speech, this craft speech, and they said, write about what obsesses you. And I was walking around, the streets of Lisbon. And so I didn't know anyone. I just started the MFA program. And so, I had a lot of time to think. And so I was thinking about, what did obsess me? I've just started this program. I'm kind of looking for my subject matter. I'm looking for the big story that I want to really focus on. And I remembered this story that I heard when I was younger. One of my really good friends, his great uncle was this famous Southern revival preacher. And
Hmm.
so I heard stories from him and his family, firsthand stories just about how charismatic this guy was, how impactful he was, how memorable. You could just tell it was palpable how people felt about him, and it was all so positive, And so and so also, this character, this person, was there were fraud allegations, so it was a complicated matter, and so. I just came back to this. There's something fascinating about that dramatic level of identity. I
Hmm.
think we all, we all have parts of ourselves that are authentic and parts that we feel good about it. And we also have to come to this reckoning of what is our own morality. And and so this character, I feel like, just dramatizes that, right? Because they're this faith healer and they're supposed to be God's instrument. So what a high watermark, and they also
Right,
happen,
right.
yeah, they also happen to be a human being. So I was just interested in what parts of that I wanted to write about a character like this, just to explore a character like that and to explore those ideas, like what's authentic, what's invented. Um, there was one in particular, one part that really influenced Pineville Trace. There was I always heard stories about how this character would disappear for stretches of time, and he would uh, go to the barrier islands. And so that always intrigued me, this idea of escape and kind of it's a very, very old spiritual idea, you go on the mountain and you come back with wisdom, right? And
Hmm.
so, and also there's this elements of escapism and there's a little bit of mystery there too. And so that really sparked my interest in this story. And like I said, I thought I was done. I wrote a novel about Frank Russet that I worked on for a number of years called Antenna, and I thought I was done with him. And I was on a work trip, and I was driving through Pineville, Kentucky. And if you ever go there, um, it's striking as you drive by the towns on Pine Mountain, which you can imagine is all these pines, and there's not a whole lot of pines everywhere in Kentucky. So in this mountain there is, and so it kind of looks like the Pacific Northwest. It's kind of striking in that way. And the town is on a mountain on this hill, like the foothills of the mountain. It's just a striking place. And so I was just driving around a little bit and I got lost. And I found myself driving by the minimum security prison that I had invented my character had stayed at, in my first novel. And it was, and so the idea came to me that there was more of this story to tell. Being in this place, it was there was more of his story to tell. And it was strange too. I write about this in the book, and this really happened. It was odd. As I'm driving and on Pine Mountain in Eastern Kentucky, you're in the middle of nowhere, up there by the Bell County Forestry Camp. It's God's country up there. And on the other side of the road, the a '59 Buick LeSabre was the car that my character Frank Russet drove. And no kidding, a Buick LeSabre. I won't say it's exact same year model, but real close. Drives by on the other side of the road in the middle of nowhere. So it was strange. So I got out my voice recorder on my phone and kind of said, I've got to hold on to this idea and pick up this story. And so it was a matter of marrying that story, that story that came to me in that moment, with the right form, and that novella in Flash was just so appealing for that kind of story.
Yeah, yeah. Anchor points in the universe. I love it. And I it's funny that you mentioned episodic and flash because as I was reading it, I was thinking those two words in particular. And really it's interesting how each section of the book can kind of stand on its own, but then it all comes together in this whole unit as well. So really interesting form that you've crafted in.
Oh, well, thank you. It was exciting to work towards that. And that was certainly the goal. Was my goal was, which is kind of an ambitious goal. I wanted each of these chapters to be a flash story that would stand on their own, right? And but also add up to something larger and speak to each other in meaningful ways, kind of spark meaning off each other and resonate with each other. So it's a bit of an ambitious goal, and it was a challenge as I'm writing, but it did create a lot of energy to work towards that goal. And
Yeah,
so that was a lot of fun.
yeah, yeah. Well, curious about the connection to storytelling, sort of that origin of how you decided that this is where you wanted to go in your life. You mentioned that you had rededicated your life and done an MFA, so curious about that part of your story.
Yeah, of course. So I always loved stories. When I was a little kid, and my dad will tell you this painfully, He'll painfully recall this. I would always make up stories, and a lot of times they would just be absurd, and I would try to convince people they were real. Like, hey, did you read this news story about? And I would just make up something absurd, and and so I was always doing that. And me and my cousins, my mom's family's from Eastern Kentucky. Actually, my dad's family, kind of Ohio to Mount Sterling, Kentucky, which is kind of the edge of Eastern Kentucky. But when we would go on vacation, me and my cousins, we would always just make up these absurd stories, on these, 10-hour drives to Florida. And it was just
Mhm,
always so much fun. And so I always loved hearing stories and telling stories. Um, I fell in love with books when I was a kid, like Indian in the Cupboard and, the Shel Silverstein poems. Then I got into high school and I just really loved, I wasn't a great high school student, by any means. Uh, but I really got into these general English classes. I would read, The Scarlet Letter and
mhm,
just
mhm.
loved it by Hawthorne, loved it. And just felt such empathy for Hester Prynne and the predicament. There you go. You've got another preacher there that's torn. And I felt like that just really dramatized that kind of sense of morality that we all have. And my family was religious, so I did grow up in a family that was religious. So that's probably part of it. Part of why I'm drawn to those types of characters too,
Mhm.
that are kind of torn between the spiritual and the worldly. But I really love, Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye. I had a really impactful freshman English teacher named Mike Meehan, and he was the football coach. And he actually happened to be a fantastic football coach. We were runners up in the state, but he also happens, and this is not always the case with coaches, right? He happened to be just a fantastic English teacher.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
he um he would talk and he would tell stories, talk about storytelling. He would tell stories about how he was from Pennsylvania, and so he would talk about working in the iron factories, in summer, when he was in school. And he would tell all these great stories. And he was like 6'6", this big booming guy, with big glasses and a beard. And he was but a very gentle guy.
Mm.
And we read Great Expectations excerpted, out of the Prentice Hall textbook.
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
just hearing that story, hearing Great Expectations, I just fell in love with that story. He had us write our own stories. We were, creative writing. We wrote several stories on our own, and he took the time, even though he had these big classes that he taught. I remember I think my mom kept the story, but he wrote feedback, on certain lines that stood out. And so he was so attentive. And so things like that, I think, make a big difference. If you're a
Mhm.
storyteller and you find people that kind of, validate what you're doing. And that was really important for me. And so, then I went on and I went to University of Kentucky and I started as a business major. And really quickly, my first semester realized this is not for me.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
this is not me. I can't do this, even if I wanted to. So we're gonna have to do something different. So I became an English major, and one of the first classes I found myself in was a fiction writing class by Gurney Norman, the Kentucky writer.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, are you familiar with Gurney by any chance?
Uh-huh,
He,
uh-huh. Love
oh,
the Appalachian literature. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, me too. And of course, this was an education because at this point in time, I was 18, 19, not just turned 19. I was unaware of Appalachian literature and I was unaware of James Still and Breese Pancake and Robert Penn Warren and Georgia Elia Lyon, Bobby Ann Mason, Wendell Berry. I could go on and on. There's all these fantastic writers
Hmm.
from the Appalachian region. And so the same thing, Gurney was really supportive and he highlighted some of my dialogue and I thought, oh, that's great. So I'm kind of hooked at this point. And
Yeah.
and it was really cool too during that class. He knew Chuck Kinder, the writer. If you're familiar with the movie Wonder Boys,
Hmm,
uh,
hmm.
the main character in that movie is based on Chuck Kinder. And
Nice.
the long book that he's writing that he never can get done, that's actually about his friendship with Raymond Carver.
Cool.
And
Very cool.
so during that class, Gurney was telling us about that. He was telling us about how he went to Stanford and he was in a writing class. He was a Stanford fellow, and he was in a writing class with Ken Kesey. And
Nice.
every week, Ken Kesey would come in with a new chapter of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Wow.
And so, just hearing some of the, at this point, I'm hooked. All right, I'm a story at this point. Okay, I'm in. I'm a storyteller, right? And I was fortunate to study under the poet James Baker Hall, and so I just love that. And then, I like you had mentioned, I stayed in it and wrote, but finding the discipline, I needed to come back and rededicate myself to writing. And so since 2014, since I restarted my MFA, I've committed to writing regularly, and I'm working on my seventh book right now. So I've just kind of stuck with it, and it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding. As a writer, you're forced to learn new things and forced to learn about yourself, and it's been so rewarding. Like Vonnegut said, it makes your soul grow, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
So,
have that quote hanging in my classroom, actually.
oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah. Well, you're certainly part of a literary lineage, it sounds like, and I'm curious if I'm a listener out there, if I'm a reader and I want to go see what your work is about, if I want to go support it in the best way that benefits you as the author, where are some spaces that I might go do that?
Sure. So the book Pineville Trace comes out on September 3rd. And so it's available for pre-order, online, Amazon, and places like that. If you would want a signed copy, if you go to my website, wesblake.com, you can purchase a signed copy there. That's another option. Um, but yeah, we're working to have it placed in libraries and independent bookstores. So if your local bookstore doesn't have it, that'd be great to ask if they can carry it, and same with libraries. Um, but yeah, those are good places to look.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I think I have one more question before we part, and that is, you spent a lot of time with your main character Frank as you were working on this book. I'm just curious, by means of a few final words, what's it like to be that close to a character that you've created?
Sure. So I have written about Frank for a long time, and Frank Russet is a character that I wrote about from 2014, and I worked on the first book with him through 2018, at least 4 years. And so I thought I was done telling his story. And to really, when this other story presented itself to me as I'm driving along Pine Mountain, I was really excited because I kind of missed him. I kind of
Hmm.
missed him. And so it was I really he interests me as a character and as a person. I always kind of wonder what he's going to do and what he's up to. And so it was really it was nice to kind of unexpectedly come back to him and to write about that character. It was nice. But yeah, it's so the his story, it's kind of followed from the beginning of his life, to later in his life, and seeing him develop. It's been really really interesting to follow him, actually, and to get to know who he is.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, Wes, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the morning coffee. I think the cat has strayed from the screen. I haven't spotted it once.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, it's okay.
That's kind of a letdown.
That's all right. That's all right. But glad to talk with you, and certainly glad that I came across the book. Always looking for wonderful books to share about, and glad to have you back as you're working on projects to come as well.
Thank you so much. Well, Jason, thanks for having me. It's been great talking to you this morning.
Yeah, great to talk with you as well.